Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we will be studying chapter 2.4, internal and external communication. 2.4.1, why effective communication is important and the method used to achieve it. Okay, out of which the first point we'll be discussing today is effective communication as it's important to business, right? So imagine, why is communication important to business? Quite easy, isn't it? Right? You need to communicate in order to get people to do their work, okay, or to give orders, okay, or to receive feedbacks, right? So effective communication. Basically, communication is a method of transferring of messages from a sender to a receiver who understands the message, right? So if the receiver does not understand the message, what's the point, right? Okay, so there are two types of communication. There are only two types really. Internal communication. Okay, this is between two members of the same organization. Therefore, communication between departments, notices, circulars to workers, and signboards and labels inside factories and offices, etc. Right? So this is internal communication. So basically, when you are communicating with your company, with your colleagues and all, with your managers and all, this is called internal communication because you're communicating in the company. So internal communication, very easy. Okay, so basically the name has the answer, doesn't it? Yeah, name has the explanation. Anyway, so the other one we'll be talking about, and this we'll be talking about a lot, is called external communication, right? So it's between organizations and other organization or individuals which are outside the company, right? So for example, ordering of goods from suppliers, advertising and all, right? So advertising is a kind of communication. Okay, how can advertising be part of communication? Because when you are advertising, you're actually telling everybody this is what we are selling. If you are interested in buying, because they have to be interested in buying, otherwise there's no point, is there? Okay, now effective communication, right? So everything that we have to do is it has to be effective. Okay, if for example you're advertising but you did not write exactly what you're advertising, then what's the point? Like if you have a new product out and you just advertise your company and you don't advertise the product, then you're losing the point. Okay, so effective in communication involves a transmission, sender of a receiver, a sender and then receiver of the message, right? So there has to be somebody saying the message and there has to be somebody receiving the message. Okay, even though it's very easy in the sense of communication, there has to be somebody talking and there has to be somebody receiving, but obviously that's one of the points. Number two, there has to be a method of communication, right? You can't just communicate on air, you have to have some process of communication, right? So for example, through letters, okay, you write something down, or through telephone, okay, or text message, for example, emails, company official letter on the letterhead type of stuff. So there has to be a medium of communication. Without a medium of communication, I don't see how you can get your point across. Even if you're talking to someone, okay, this is called oral communication. So there is still a medium, okay. There has to be a receiver of the message, and of course there has to be a feedback or response from the receiver to confirm that the message has been received and acknowledged. Okay, so this is effective communication. Number one, transmission. Okay, somebody has to be saying the message as to speak, okay, and then there has to be a method of communication, which has to be a letter, telephone, email, text, something like that. Okay, then there has to be a receiver of the message. Okay, somebody has to receive the message, and then there has to be a feedback, for example, respond, confirmation that you have received the letter. For example, let's take an example here. Okay, let's say you are making an advertisement for the company. Okay, so when you make an advertisement for the company, obviously you make the advertisement, right? So that's the, somebody has to make the advertisement, so that's the sender. Okay, so when after the advertisement has been designed, printed, and posted over there, okay, that's the method of communication. Okay, so basically advertisement. Okay, and then there has to be a receiver. You have to think who will see this message, right? So if you just put a message there and nobody looks at it, you have to choose a space where most of the people would look at it. Okay, so for example, where a lot of traffic's going by and you put a signboard there, so there we are. Okay, so that is the receiver. And then there has to be a feedback. Okay, how do you get a feedback? Okay, basically people look at your product and they start buying, right? So they start buying. For example, if you have a very interesting, for example, you say sale 50% off, and everybody rushes to your stores, right? So that is feedback. Okay, so you get a feedback from there. Okay, in other communications, for example, a letter or a telephone, on a letter you get a feedback. For example, you ask a question or something, so you get a instant feedback, somebody writes back to you. Okay, for example, a telephone, you kind of receive the thing there and then, right? So you say hello and the other guy says hello, so there we are, feedback. Okay, so the person understand. For example, you send a text message. Okay, as soon as you send a text message, somebody replies back to you, so that is feedback. Okay, so somebody understands your question or your comment, that is why he's replying it to you, right? Otherwise he won't reply to you, or he would go like, what? Anyway, so there are, again, this is the effective communication. Okay, however, there are other types of communication, like for example, one-way communication, right? Involves a message which does not require a feedback. Okay, for example, a sign, managers parking, okay, or directors parking, or no smoking, for example. Okay, this kind of things does not require a feedback. Okay, nobody has to tell you, okay, I understand the sign. Okay, they just have to, I suppose, follow the sign and stop smoking, I suppose. And that's where we are. For example, instructions saying deliver these goods to a customer. Okay, so for example, you write an instruction saying please deliver this to so and so. Okay, and then that something does not need a feedback. You don't need somebody to tell you, okay, I understand the address or something. As long as the thing is delivered, I suppose that is feedback enough that the product has been delivered. Okay, that is one kind of communication, which is one-way communication. Okay, there is another which is called two-way communication, in which the receiver gives a response for the message received. Okay, for example, you write a letter and you receive a response for the letter. There we are. Okay, you receive a response on the phone. There we are. Okay, that's two-way communication. Okay, and obviously there are other types, which is downwards communication, message from manager to subordinates. Okay, so that is downwards, coming from top of the company to the bottom of the company. For example, instructions to do something, right? And then there is an upward communication, which is, let's say somebody gives you a feedback or a message. For example, please increase my pay. So that is feedback. Or maybe, for example, you install a new system and then you want somebody to tell you, obviously they would tell you, oh sorry, it's not working, or please get it fixed or something. That is upwards communication. Feedback from subordinates to managers, as to speak. Okay, from the bottom of the company to the top of the organizational structure. And we have talked about organizational structures in the last chapter, so if you haven't checked it out, check it out here. Anyway, and there is horizontal communication, right? So that is downwards, upwards, and that is horizontal. Now, horizontal occurs when two people on the same level of the organization structure speak to each other, right? So if managers speak to managers, for example, there's a accounts manager and there is a floor manager and they're speaking to each other, but they're both managers, so that is called horizontal communication. Okay, so effective communication and the importance to business, there we are. Okay, so we understand that. Now we are talking about the second chapter, benefits and limitation of different communication methods, including those based on information technology. Information technology basically just means computers, isn't it? Right? So that's it, isn't it? So basically you can do all this through the internet, and Okay, so communication methods and their advantages and disadvantages, as to speak, right? So benefits and limitations. Okay, benefits are advantages, and limitations is something that you can't do on that type of communication. So number one we'll be talking about is called verbal. Okay, verbal communication. Okay, this is quite easy. You just tell somebody something, and there we are. For example, telephonic conversation. You go like, hello, how are you? I'm fine, thank you. So verbal communication. Face-to-face communication, for example, you're standing in front of somebody, that is called verbal communication. A video conference. Okay, this comes the IT part in the verbal communication. For example, a video conversation or a meeting. Okay, so when you meet somebody physically in a room, there we are, meeting. Okay, now what are the advantages of a verbal communication? Okay, it's quick and quick and efficient, right? So basically you just say something to somebody and he replies back to you on the spot. So it's quick and it's efficient. You kind of look at the other guy, you read his face, you read his communication, read the way whether he likes your comment, he doesn't like your comment. You can get instant feedback on the spot, right? There's an opportunity of immediate feedback. Okay, so you say something and you get immediate feedback, and the other feedback doesn't actually have to be verbal. It could be just the guy looking at you because you said something. Okay, so that is verbal effective communication. You see, speakers can reinforce their message. Okay, change his tone, body language to influence the listener. Okay, so for example, if you're writing somebody a letter, then you can't actually get a feedback on the spot, or he might mean something and write something else, whatever. And if you, for example, you're doing a verbal communication and you're talking to other people, you can change the way you look, or the way you're sitting, or the way your body language. You can change your body language to make the other guy understand and go through it. Right, so these are the advantages of verbal communication. You get feedback on the spot, and you exactly know what the other guy is thinking or saying, because you can look at him, as to speak. Okay, so what are the disadvantages of verbal communication? Okay, can take long if there's a feedback and therefore discussion. Okay, so for example, if you were to write something on a letter and the other guy could just read it, okay, in verbal communication it could get longer, right? So you say something and the other guy gives you a feedback, oh no, we don't want to do this, and you fall into a discussion. It can take very long. Okay, because obviously you have to satisfy your goals and you have to satisfy the other guy before you end your verbal communication. Okay, so in a meeting, it cannot be guaranteed that everybody is listening and has understood the message. So for example, you have a meeting, 15 people meeting together, and they're talking to each other. One guy might be busy in his mobile and then might not exactly be listening. So there is no guarantee of feedback. One-to-one communication, this obviously doesn't happen because you're saying and the other guy is replying to you. However, in a meeting, somebody might not be listening. So in 15 people, one might not be listening, right? So if he's not listening, he might not catch that one particular point which you might be trying to make, and therefore lose the whole conversation. Okay, disadvantage number 3 is there is no record of the message, right? So you say and the other guy hears, and there is no record which can be kept for later references. So if something is, for example, misunderstood and the guy does not ask you for explanation, then the message is kind of lost and you can't exactly go back and reference it later, that I told you this, or I told you that, right? So that with that we finish verbal communication. Now we come to the second part, which is written communication. Okay, for example, letters, memos, text messages, reports, emails, social media, faxing, notices, and signboard. So the email part is the IT part in there. So you might have picked that up. When you write something to someone, there we are, written communication. Okay, what are the advantages of written communication? There is an evidence of the message for a later reference, right? So I wrote this to you, like for example, and the other guy has a written communique and you have a written communique. So you cannot be misunderstood, or maybe even if you are misunderstood, you kind of wrote it down, like there is no choice in there. So there is an evidence for later reference. So written communication is mostly preferred. Okay, can include details. Okay, the written communication can include big details, whereas maybe you fall into a discussion and you kind of forget some details, but in a written communication you write all the details, just to make everything clear and all. Okay, so can include details, right? Can be copied and sent to many people, especially with email. Right, with email you can just like CC to everybody or BCC to everybody. Okay, so that can be copied and sent to many people, whereas even if you write a letter or a memo, it can still be copied and sent to many people, and many people can read it, and obviously the guy who's addressed is the one who has to read it, and the other people could just get a reference, like he wrote me this, a kind of thing. Right, email and fax are quick and cheap. Okay, so emails and faxes are quick and cheap, whereas letters have to be posted and would take time to reach the person concerned. Email can get there instantly. Okay, so as soon as you press send, that's about it really. And fax, as the paper is going through on this side, it's coming out on the other side. Fax are not used anymore, so I don't see why I'm explaining this to you. But anyway, email and faxes are quick and cheap. Okay, so they get there on the spot and they're really quick. Okay, there are, however, disadvantages to these written communication. Okay, direct feedback is not always possible, right? So if you're writing something to somebody, okay, you don't get a feedback instantly. Okay, so you don't know what kind of how the guy received the message, or was he angry on you, or did he understand it properly, or did he get your grammar, did he get your spelling, or maybe he didn't, so there we are. Okay, so direct feedback is not possible. Okay, cannot ensure that the message has been delivered or acknowledged, right? So for example, you write something to somebody on an email, for example, and after 3 or 4 hours he comes and talks to you and goes like, oh, you didn't tell me what to do about this and that, and you go like, oh, I send you an email, or like, oh, I didn't receive my email, my phone's broken down or something like that, or I didn't get home to read the email. So it cannot always be guaranteed that the message has received the receiver, the message has been received or acknowledged, for it to be taking effect, kind of thing. It might just take some time, right? So if you post a letter, it might just be lost and never reaches the person. So there we are. Okay, language can be difficult to understand. Some legal matters, if you write a letter about some legal matters, it might be difficult for the other person to understand, or might interpret it wrongly. Okay, so might understand something else, whereas you're talking about something else, and everything just goes to waste. Okay, no opportunity for body language to be used to reinforce the message. Okay, so for example, you can't be intimidating or happy while you're saying something intimidating, to no body language. So there is no body language, so obviously there is the only thing you can talk about is what you've written down, and it doesn't actually kind of show which mood you are, whether you were angry when you wrote the message or whether you were happy when you wrote the message. So details are lost. Many visual details are lost. Okay, now we'll be talking about the last type of communication, which is called visual communication. Okay, so visual communication is things you can see. For example, diagrams, charts, videos, presentations, and all, photographs, cartoons, posters, right? So these are visual communication. Like for example, advertisements, that is kind of a visual advertisement. There are some advantages to this type of advertisement. For example, can present in an appealing and attractive way. Okay, so you can represent your letters in a more appealing and attractive way. Can be used along with written materials, right? So you write a letter and then you put a chart there, or a graph there, or pie chart or something. Like for example, we hold how much part of the total market or something like that. So You can put some charts in there to make it more appealing and more attractive and stuff like that. You can have colors and stuff going on in there. You can put a picture in there, giving your point, as to speak. Okay, there are, however, some disadvantages to this. There is no feedback. Okay, so there is no feedback to this, and it might be understood or interpreted not properly, might not be understood or interpreted properly, right? So for example, you put a very complicated pie chart in there, and the other guy maybe cannot read a pie chart or does not understand a pie chart, or maybe you put a bar chart in there and people cannot understand it properly. So that is the disadvantages of visual communication. And same could be said for an email. For example, you write an email and you put some graphics in there and stuff like that, and people don't understand those charts or graphs or posters, or you put a picture in there and people don't understand what's the meaning of this picture. So there we are. Okay, so advantages and disadvantages of visual communication. Okay, now we come to the third part. Okay, recommend and justify which communication to use in a given circumstances, right? So even though I cannot, like that is part of the questions, right? So I don't have questions, but I will still tell you factors that affect the choice of the appropriate communication method. Okay, so you can kind of pick and choose from these when a question does appear, right? So for example, what are the factors that affect the to choose appropriate communication method? Okay, so to get your point across, okay, what exactly do you want to do? Okay, so number one, you want to consider the speed of your message. How fast do you want your message to get across to the receiver? Okay, if the receiver has to get the information quickly, then the telephone call or text message has to be sent. If speed isn't important, the letter or an email is more appropriate, right? So what exactly do you want your how fast do you want your message to get across to the other side, right? So you say something and then you want it to be implemented at the spot, on the spot, or do you want, as long as the message gets through, it's okay? So the speed of the communication is most important. Okay, then obviously you have to consider the cost of the communication, right? So if the company wishes to keep the cost down, it may choose to use letters or face-to-face meeting as a medium of communication. Otherwise, telephone, posters, etc. will be used. Okay, so you have to keep down the cost of the communication. So face-to-face is obviously cheaper because you kind of standing together, isn't it? So it could be cheaper. So to keep the you have to keep cost in mind in order to start the communication. Okay, message details. What are the details of the message, right? So if the message is very detailed, then written and visual communication will be used. Okay, for example, my company has 15% of the market space, and the other company has 20% of the market space, and the other company has 45% of the market space. So the numbers are kind of lost, right? So what are the details in the message? So if it's a very easy message, for example, stop machine number A, so that doesn't need to be detailed. However, if for example you're telling the other guy the percentages or numbers or a couple of different instructions all together, and you make sure everything is followed, then you have to understand that written or visual is more preferred. Okay, so message details, the amount of message you want to put in your details is very important in order to choose which factor you will be using to communicate. Okay, leadership style. A democratic style would use two-way communication methods such as visual mediums, and autocrat would use notices and announcements. Okay, so if you want two-way communication, or you want a one-way communication, or you just want to give instructions and you're not worried about the feedback, so that is also dependent on the leadership style. Okay, the receiver. Okay, there are only receivers that are personal face-to-face or telephone calls will be more appropriate if there is a personal, if there is only receiver. If all the staff is to be sent a message, a notification, or an email would be more appropriate, right? So how many numbers of receivers do you have? Okay, for example, you just want to give it to one person, you just want to tell your managers what to do, or you want the whole staff to go like 10% of your salary would be cut this month, so you want to tell it to everybody. So would you be using a notice, please do not park your car in parking number 2? So you would actually write a notice there, right? So how many people do you want to communicate it to? So how many receivers do you have? Okay. Importance of the written record. If the message is one that needs to be recorded in a legal document, or receipts of new customer orders, then a written method will be used, right? So you would for example, write a receipt to someone. You want to write a receipt to someone, so obviously you write a receipt, not just kind of speak and get it done with. So importance of a written record. How important is it is to record what you are saying or what you're communicating to your staff, for example. Okay. Last point we'll be looking at is importance of feedback. If feedback is important, like a quick query, then a direct verbal or written method has to be used, right? So do you want the feedback on the spot, or do you want feedback later on, or you don't really care about the feedback, right? So you will choose appropriate communication in that instance. Okay, last thing I'll be talking about is formal communication and informal communication. Okay, so while writing a message, you have to consider whether you're writing a formal letter or formal communication. It's a formal form of communication, or it's an informal form of communication. Okay, a formal communication is when a message is sent through established channels with professional languages, reports, emails, memos, official timings and stuff. So that is formal communication. Okay, informal communication is when the information is sent and received casually, use everyday languages. Therefore, staff briefings, managers can sometimes use grapevines. Informal communication along employees, usually with rumors and gossip spread. Okay, so that is informal communication. So you have to keep this in mind in order to choose the medium of communication that you'll be using to communicate your message. Okay, now we come to 2.4.2, demonstrate an awareness of communication barriers. Okay, so how communication barriers arise and problems with ineffective communication, how communication barriers can be reduced or removed, as to speak. So you want to get your message across, okay, and that's the whole point of communication. Okay, you want to get your message across. If the other guy does not understand your message or does not get your message, because there are barriers in communication, right? So one of the barriers, which I'll just tell you in quickly, is language problem. Maybe you speak another language and your receiver sends another language, so it might be hard to understand. Okay, so we will discuss about four main points. Okay, 4 main barriers, and then we'll subdivide it into different categories. Okay, number one, the first barrier could be problem with the sender. Okay, so the guy who's sending the message, okay, there might be a problem with him. So for example, language is too difficult to understand. For example, jargon, technical terms may be misunderstood by the receiver. Okay, so that is a problem with the sender. How the barrier can be overcome. Okay, the sender should ensure the message uses languages which is understandable. Use the jargon or terms that are too technical should be avoided. Okay, so to use technical jargon, unless you're in the field for a long time, you might not understand. So that could be a problem with the sender. Okay, not exactly the receiver. This could be the problem with the sender. Okay, the other problem with the sender could be the sender uses verbal means of communication but speaks too quickly and not clear enough. Okay, so speaks too quickly and not clear enough. Okay, so that could be one of the barriers, barriers of the sender. Okay, this obviously the possible solution is make your message clear as possible and speak as slow as the other guy could understand, right? So decrease the speed of your speech, as to speak. Okay, the other barrier with the sender could be the sender communicates the wrong message or passes it to the wrong receiver. Okay, obviously this would occur if, for example, a director says something to the worker, and the manager, he never speaks to the manager because maybe the manager was not there at that time when the message was being sent, or maybe he was absent that day or something like that. Okay, so it's very easy to correct this. The sender must make sure that the right person is receiving the right message. Okay, so it is the responsibility of the sender and not actually the receiver, is it? The message is too long and too much detail prevents the main point being understood. This is again a fault of the sender. Okay, so if you're giving too much information and the main point is not exactly understood, then what's the point? Okay, that is kind of a barrier. Okay, so obviously the easiest way to understand this or overcome it is the message should be brief as possible to allow the main points to be understood. Okay, now this was the barrier problem with the sender. Okay, however, there is another problem, the problem with the medium. Okay, the medium, the way you communicate. Okay, the first description I would say is message may be lost to the receiver, did not the message may be lost, so the receiver did not send it. Sorry, cut that. Okay, the message may be lost, so the receiver may not see it. Okay, so if you write a letter and it is lost in the mail, then obviously the receiver never receives it. So there we are. So easier way to overcome it is important to insist on a feedback. If no feedback has been received, the sender assumes the message was lost. Okay, so problem with the medium. Okay, another problem with the medium is the wrong channel has been used. Therefore, an important message was put in a notice board which most people did not read. Okay, so for example, no returns, only exchanges. If you write it on a piece of paper and you stick it on your shop, and people might not exactly read it because they're shopping and they're not exactly reading or not looking for it. So a sender must select the appropriate channel for each message sent, right? So that is the how to overcome the barrier. Okay, if the message is sent down a long chain of command, the original meaning of the message may be lost. It could become distorted. Okay, so this is another problem with the medium. Okay, message is sent down a long chain and the original message or the meaning of the original message has been lost. Obviously the only possible way to overcome this is the shortest possible channel should be used to get your message across. Okay, another problem with the medium could be no feedback is received. Okay, this could be because a letter was sent to worker asking for his opinion. A meeting would have been more useful. Okay, so that is how to overcome this barrier when there is no feedback is received. Okay, another problem with the medium could be breakdown of the medium. Okay, for example, computer failure or postal strike. Okay, the only way to overcome this is other forms of communication should be where possible be made available. Okay, now we talk about problems with the receiver. Okay, now first we talked about the problem with the sender. Okay, the problem with the medium used. And now we're talking about the problem with the sender, with the receiver, sorry. Okay, so sender, medium, and then receiver. Okay, there might be listening. They might not be listening or paying attention. Okay, so the receiver might not be listening or paying attention to what was being said. Okay, so how to overcome this barrier is the importance of the message should be emphasized. The receiver should be asked for feedback to ensure understanding. Okay, it's kind of when the teacher is speaking in a class and most of the students are not even listening. If teacher asks them a question, then obviously that is feedback, and if anybody understood the message, they would give feedback. Otherwise, they might not exactly know what she's talking about. Okay, so another problem with the receiver could be the receiver may not like or trust the sender. This may be unwilling to act upon the message. Okay, so the receiver might be unwilling to act on the message. So for example, you give an instruction and he or she is not interested in what you have to say and doesn't really care about you, so he might not be interested in the message. Okay, the only way to overcome this is there should be a trust between both the sender and the receiver for effective communication is unlikely. Perhaps other senders should be used who are respected by the receiver. Okay, this happens very rarely, but it does happen. Okay, now we talk about the last point, which is problems with the feedback. Okay, so problem with the feedback, number one, there is no feedback. Okay, when there is no feedback, perhaps no feedback is being asked for. Okay, that could be perhaps a method of communication used did not ask for a feedback. Okay, so if there is no feedback, obviously maybe nobody just asked for it, or maybe it does not require a feedback. So there we are. Okay, the last one we'll be talking about problem with the feedback is the receiver is too slow or is distorted. It is received too slow or distorted. As with the original message, perhaps the feedback is passed through too many people before being received by the original sender of the message. So you might send a message, okay, and while the message comes back or the feedback comes back, it might be distorted or you might just not understand it. Okay, so the only way to overcome this is direct lines of communication between subordinates and managers must be available. Direct communication is always more effective. Okay, so for example, you send a letter and the other guy receives a letter, and when he sends you a feedback, maybe it's lost in the mail, or maybe it just rained that day and the letter just got wet. Okay, so you might not receive a feedback in that case. Okay, so with that, we have finished how communication barriers arise and problems with ineffective communication, how communication barriers can be reduced or removed. Okay, obviously communication barriers could not be removed, but they can be reduced. Okay, with that, we come to an end of internal and external communication. As I have told you before in all my videos, try to understand what I'm saying. What I'm saying is important, and obviously we don't want a communication barriers between us, as we just learned, right? So if, for example, you don't understand something that I said, or you don't understand some of the details or something like that, just ask me in the comments and I will reply. Okay, if it is too complicated, I'll make a video. If it is not, I'll just answer in one word or one line or something like that. Okay, so do not not reply, do reply. Okay, and if you're getting some advantage from this, I always want to know, I'm always interested that who is getting more advantage of these videos. It'll encourage me to make more videos. So if you get some advantage out of it, do let me know, and I'll make more videos of this type. If you don't understand a particular point, let me know what exact point don't you understand, so I'll make another short video just for you, okay, and make you feel special. Okay, with that, this is your host Mohsin Bukhari signing out.